Welcome to another Reaper blog tutorial. Today we're talking about ReaDelay, one of the free stock plugins, and we're going to get several different delay effects for a song. Let's check it out. And before we get started, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. More about them later. All right, let's get started. We've got a project here, and I'll play this kind of as it's mixed. Really basic processing, some EQ, some delay, some compression for ducking effects. And now I'll play that again without the delay effects, and then we'll break it down and go through each of the delays to show you what's happening. Taking away the delay plugins, it sounds like this. So instantly, there's less space, the groove is different, and it's less interesting. Let's go through these one at a time. And I think a good one to start with is the hi-hat. And I'll take away the sidechain compression on this so you can hear it straight as it is. It's just a single hi-hat sample from a TR-606. And I'm using the sidechain compression with recomp triggered by the kick and the snare to get sort of a pumping flow. Right, whenever the kick and snare go, the hi-hat gets turned down. And the delay. What I'm doing here is creating sort of a stereo effect. This is recorded as a stereo file, but I believe it is actually mono coming in. Adding ReaDelay and setting this up as a widener creates sort of a sense of space or kind of positions it in a room in a way. We're taking advantage of what's called the Haas effect, where it's just a short delay on one side, which kind of tricks your brain into hearing this sound sort of in a 3D space, because there's a short delay between what you hear on your left ear versus what you hear in your right ear that kind of puts that sound in a space. So I got ReaDelay set up on the left side, but tap one, pan to the left right here, just flat. No settings on here. The time and the length, musical, feedback, filters, those are all set at 0. It's doing nothing on the left side. On tap 2, I've got it panned to the right, set to delay 12 milliseconds. No filtering, no other things happening here. I've just got the wet control down, which is essentially how loud the output of this delay effect is, turned down by -9. So once again, playing it back flat. And with the delay. And I'll bypass the compression so you can kind of hear that without any other movement. So what I hear is that instead of just straight down the middle, it kind of shifts it to one side, almost like a pan, but it kind of softens it in a way as well. It's really just a matter of the volume being changed slightly and then positioning it kind of in between the speakers by that delay amount. We can fool around with this delay time as well. So 12 milliseconds is pretty short. That's within what they call the Haas zone, that very short time period between hearing it as a distinct echo. 30 milliseconds. And you almost hear 2 going to 35. It's super wide, but it sounds like 2 separate instruments now almost. Especially when you toggle it on and off, you can really hear that the right side is delayed. Setting this back to how it was, 12 milliseconds is a kind of subtle amount of widening for this sound. And this is a trick that I use in a lot of my mixes. Any mono synth that comes in or percussion sounds, a lot of times I'll just add this in. And if I'm using this more than once in the mix, I'll often reverse the panning of some of those instruments, just so that I'm not widening it all and it kind of sounds shifted to one side. So that's the hi-hat. Next, let's look at the crash cymbal. So here's the crash cymbal. It's a TR-808, and what I wanted this to do was kind of add some depth to this. I wanted this to repeat, and then I wanted it also to kind of decay in volume and in frequency. So first up, I've got another widener, and I'll actually just adjust this to make sure that it is not the exact same as before, and I will flip this around because I forgot to do that earlier. So this is the same settings except 15 milliseconds, so slightly wider than the hi-hat, and reversed panning so that it's a little more balanced in stereo field. If I'm delaying 1 by 12 and that kind of shifts it to the right, I want to delay the other one by a different amount and also with a different panning. So here's how that sounds. The crash with a widener and without. And the reason I'm using the widener there is because that's a mono file to begin with. And with something like a crash, you could go much further. And now here is the main delay effect that I wanted on this. And I've set this up so that we're delaying by 1.5 eighth notes on the left side. And I didn't do it fully all the way to the left, 80% to the left. I'm also filtering it using the high pass filter at just about 4,000 hertz. I'm using the feedback control so it actually repeats, whereas with the widening function, it's actually just a single repeat. There's no feedback. With the second tap, I'm delaying this by about the same amount, so 1.5 and 1.51, just slightly longer on the right side. Again, that kind of does that Haas effect, kind of shifting where you can hear it slightly different times, it sounds wider. And the filter is the same for this, the feedback's the same, and the panning is about the opposite, about 87%. So here's how that sounds. And so that decays for about 4 bars. It's completely gone at 4 bars. But when it's in the mix, you really only hear it kind of in the first 2 bars, maybe. I experimented with different musical lengths for this. I'll play this with the kick and the snare. And if I change this to 1/8 note, and let's do 1.05. It didn't really have the right feel for me. So 1.51 and 1.5. This just had a nice different feel. So this is 1.5 eighth notes or 3/16 notes, or what is that? A dotted eighth note. And with everything else being kind of a straight beat, I think that adds in a nice kind of different rhythmic element. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with thousands of interesting classes on art, design, productivity, and more. I'm actually about to relaunch a podcast that I started way back in 2008 called The Home Recording Show. And part of my kind of research or preparation process for that is to go through some classes and listen to a lot of podcasts about podcasting. And so one of the resources I'm using is Skillshare. And I'll show you a couple of the classes that I'm taking right now. Podcast marketing, how to grow your audience with a marketing plan, social media, and metadata tips. I'm only a few lessons into this, but it's really good, giving me a lot of things that I don't think about as an audio engineer. I've also bookmarked this class, A Practical Guide to Creating a Podcast. I haven't gone through it at all yet. It's actually a 5-hour class, and it looks really excellent. And then lastly, improve your interviewing skills for podcasts, blogs, journalism, and academic research. One of those things that is long overdue for learning. I often focus on the technical aspects of, how to set up streaming and recording and how to get better guitar tones and all that junk. I always have a problem talking to people, and I don't think my interview questions are very good. So I'm looking forward to going through this class and improving my interview skills finally. And that's just a small example of some of the classes that are available. So if this is interesting, click the link in the description. The first 1,000 people will get a free month of Skillshare Premium, which gives you access to every single class and workshop, offline access, and more. Skillshare is a great place to learn, and I'm always happy to have them as a sponsor for the channel. Thanks for checking out the sponsor. It really helps. All right, back to the video. Now for the snare drum, I wanted this sort of, not quite dubby kind of effect, but kind of just something that adds some depth, something that fills in the in-between beats a little bit. So we're delaying with just a mono delay tap, hand in the center, and this is delaying by an eighth note. Lots of feedback and lots of filtering. So I'm using the low-pass filter at 865 hertz, which is almost everything being removed. I'm blending that in at minus 7.9. So here's how it sounds on its own. And delayed. And so I just wanted this kind of deep, dark, sort of in-between filler kind of sound. And I think that adds a lot. So here's all the drums together. And I'll bypass all of the delays. Simple effects, but I think it adds so much to this. Moving on, let's look at the arpeggiator synth. So this is stereo synth line recorded from my Minilog XD. And I turned off all the effects on that so that I would have something to process in here. I'm actually going to give this a boost because I normally have this very low in the mix. And let's hear it. So it's a very quick, repeating kind of arpeggio line. Using the delay on this track, it now sounds like this. So it kind of comes and goes in waves. What I'm doing here is pretty simple. It's a half an eighth note or 1/16th note with lots of feedback. I'm not using any of the filters at this time. And then on the right side, I'm setting that to 1/8th note, so double what is on the left. So we hear the original sound coming through first, then we hear a repeat on the left, and then a repeat on the right, and both of them repeat themselves. And as that's happening, new sounds are coming in, and it kind of just builds up, and things are stacking on top of each other. It's incredibly simple, but it adds so much to the sound of this. And that's not even using any of the additional widening functions. So using the length control, we can add this to the 1/8th note offset. Or as I showed earlier, we could just change this to 0.51 or 0.555 or something like that, and just add a slight offset. I don't know, let's do 11 on the left and 16 on the right. Kind of random numbers, but in that Haas zone. And then let's also use the filters. So it's filtered at 8K. Up to 900. Bringing that back down to where it was in the mix before, let's hear this. And bypassed. For such a clean delay, I think this adds a lot to the mix and definitely makes it more interesting and fills in so much of the space in this very sparse sample-based arrangement. There's so many other delay effects out there, from hardware effects, like effects pedals, or multi-effects racks, or just, so many different plugins available. And they all have different features, but I just wanted to show off some of the things you can do just with the stock delay plugin, because as simple as it is, it can still do some great results. So that's it for the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.